On the evening of August 9th, 1986, more than 120,000 people packed into grounds of Knebworth House in Hertfordshire, England, to watch Queen close out their magic tour. Nobody in that crowd, not the roadies, not the promoters, not even the band members themselves, knew they were witnessing something history would later frame as an ending. Freddie Mercury would never sing with Queen live again. What makes this night endlessly fascinating isn't just that it was Freddie's last stand. It's the strange, almost eerie details that surrounded it. Omens nobody caught in the moment, chaos backstage that contradicted the polished spectacle on stage, and a real tragedy in the crowd that had nothing to do with rock and roll excess and everything to do with human unpredictability. This is a story of that night, and the odd, unsettling threads woven through it. Knebworth almost didn't exist as a concert at all. Queen had booked 2 nights at Wembley Stadium in July 1986 as the centerpiece of their European tour, and those sold out in a matter of hours. Promoter Harvey Goldsmith found himself buried under demand he couldn't satisfy even with additional dates in Newcastle and Manchester. Knebworth Park was tacked on almost as an afterthought, a release valve for ticket buyers who couldn't get in anywhere else. That improvised, bolted-on quality is part of what makes the night so strange in hindsight. The most consequential concert of Freddie Mercury's career, the one historians and fans now treat as a sacred final bow, wasn't originally part of the plan. It existed because Queen had become too big for their own tour schedule. The show was billed as a night of summer magic, and it capped a tour that had already made history in its own right. The Magic Tour played 26 dates, grossed roughly £11 million, and drew about 400,000 fans across Western Europe, including a single, remarkable performance behind the Iron Curtain in Hungary, where the band played to a stadium crowd using borrowed camera equipment, because Hungarian state media had never filmed a Western rock concert of that scale before. Here is one of the strangest facts of all. The most significant concert Freddie Mercury ever gave, his last with the band that made him, has no official professional film record. Henry Lytton Cobbold, whose family owns Knebworth House and who watched the show as a young man, later expressed disbelief that no one thought to press record on a proper camera crew for a performance of that magnitude. Wembley had been professionally filmed just weeks earlier and released as the concert film Live at Wembley. Knebworth somehow was not. The tour's momentum, the exhaustion of closing out a massive run of shows, or simple bad luck meant that the final chapter of Freddie fronting Queen survives mostly through amateur audience footage, including one now famous Dutch bootleg that consists of someone filming a Jumbotron screen at the back of the crowd for the entire show. The audio was multi-tracked and later released on the Live Magic album, but the closest thing to a visual record of Freddie's true farewell is grainy, secondhand, and accidental. It's a strange kind of irony. A band famous for pioneering the modern music video, for treating spectacle and image as central to their art, ended their most important live chapter with almost nothing but memory and static-laced bootlegs to show for it. John Deacon was, by every account from people who knew him, the quiet one. He avoided interviews, avoided drama, and largely let Freddie, Brian May, and Roger Taylor handle the spotlight and the friction that came with fame. At Knebworth, something in him cracked. According to Queen's longtime roadie Peter Hintz, Deacon smashed his bass guitar into his own amplifier immediately after finishing Radio GAGA, a jarring, out-of-character outburst from a man who almost never displayed public frustration. Hintz later said he had no idea what triggered it. Deacon wasn't angry at his equipment or at his bandmates specifically. He was simply, inexplicably, not himself for the entirety of that final tour. It's a small moment, but a genuinely strange one when placed against everything else that happened that night. A band member behaving out of character, hours before what would turn out to be his last performance ever with a classic lineup, is exactly the kind of detail that reads very differently in hindsight than it must have felt in the moment. Freddie Mercury would not receive an official HIV diagnosis until following year, in 1987, and reportedly did not learn he progressed to AIDS until 1987 as well, according to those closest to him. Yet in the weeks surrounding Knebworth, he made comments that, viewed retrospectively, sound almost like a man quietly preparing to say goodbye. Roughly 2 weeks before the Knebworth show, while Queen were performing in Budapest, a journalist asked Freddie whether he would return to play the city's Nep Stadium again someday. His reply, delivered with characteristic dry humor, was simply that he would, if he was still alive. Around the same period, Brian May overheard a tense exchange between Freddie and John Deacon during a tour stop in Spain. In the middle of a minor disagreement, Freddie reportedly told Deacon that he wouldn't always be around to keep doing this. May recalled the comment as strange and unsettling, but at the time nobody read it as anything more than tour fatigue talking. These fragments only became eerie in retrospect. In the moment, they were thrown away lines from a tired man on a grueling tour. Only years later, once Freddie's illness and death reframed everything that happened in 1986, did they take on the weight of prophecy. Whatever turmoil was happening behind the scenes, the show that Freddie and Queen delivered that night was, by every account, a masterclass. The production alone was staggering for the era. Roughly 5,000 amplifiers, more than 8 miles of cable, and a video screen the size of a small building, all crammed into grounds of an English country state. The stage stretched some 160 feet across, flanked by two 40-foot runways that let Freddie prowl deep into the crowd. The band arrived by helicopter from Battersea Heliport, painted with the artwork from their A Kind of Magic album, circling low over the Thames and Battersea Power Station before touching down near the venue, an entrance built for a band that, at that point, genuinely believed, with good reason, that they were the biggest live act on the planet. The setlist itself became, unknowingly, a kind of greatest hits farewell. It opened with One Vision, a song written in the emotional afterglow of Live Aid the year before and moved the band's full catalog. Tie Your Mother Down, Seven Seas of Rye. Under Pressure, Another One Bites the Dust. Who Wants to Live Forever? I Want to Break Free. Bohemian Rhapsody. Hammer to Fall. Crazy Little Thing Called Love. And eventually closing with the same trio that had electrified Live Aid. We Will Rock You. We Are the Champions, and God Save the Queen. Freddie ended the night dressed in a crown and a flowing gown that his friend Diana Mosley had designed specifically for the tour's closing image, a king's costume for what turned out to be a king's farewell, though nobody watching had any idea that's what it was. Estimates of the crowd size are strange in their own right. The official attendance was recorded at 120,000, making it the largest paying audience Queen had ever played to in Britain. But some music historians, including biographer Mark Blake, have argued the real number on the ground that day, accounting for people who scaled fences or simply walked in unchecked amid the chaos, was closer to 200,000. Nobody has ever fully reconciled the discrepancy, which means one of the most mythologized concerts in rock history doesn't even have an agreed-upon head count. Not every strange fact about that night is really about the band at all, and the most disturbing one has almost nothing to do with music. According to contemporary newspaper reporting from the Times and the Glasgow Herald, a 21-year-old man from Airdrie, Scotland, named Tom McGuigan, was involved in an altercation near the front of the crowd shortly after Queen took the stage. The argument escalated into a violent attack. McGuigan was stabbed multiple times by a group of other attendees and later died of injuries at Lister Hospital in Stevenage. 3 young men were subsequently charged in a trial at St. Albans. Crown Court in 1987 examined the circumstances of the attack in detail. What makes this genuinely unsettling isn't just that a young fan lost his life at what should have been a joyful night out. It's how completely disconnected it was from the show happening on stage. Queen played on, unaware. Most of the 120,000-strong crowd had no idea anything had happened at all. St. John ambulance volunteers reportedly treated well over 1,000 people for various injuries and medical issues that day, evidence of just how packed and chaotic the site had become. But the fatal stabbing was, by every account, an isolated, senseless act of violence buried inside a sea of celebration. It's a jarring reminder that strange facts about a legendary concert aren't always charming trivia. Sometimes they're grim footnotes that got lost underneath the mythology, the kind of detail that rarely makes it into a highlight reel, but that was very real for people who lived through it, especially the family of a young man who simply wanted to see his favorite band and never made it home. When the show ended, Freddie Mercury took his final bow as Queen's frontman with the same theatrical flourish he'd brought to the stage for 16 years, resplendent in his crown and gown, thanking the crowd and wishing them, in his own words, a good night and sweet dreams. Then, according to those close to him, something shifted. Brian may later recall that after Knebworth, Freddie told the band privately that he didn't want to do any more large-scale touring. Whether that decision came from creative fatigue, an instinctive sense that his body was changing, or simply the accumulated exhaustion of an era-defining tour, nobody can say with total certainty. Freddie kept his own counsel about his health for years afterward, and even the people nearest to him have offered different accounts of exactly when he understood what was happening to him. Queen would go on to record together for years afterward, The Miracle in 1989 and Innuendo in 1991 among them, but they never toured behind those albums, and Freddie never performed live with the band again. Knebworth, chosen almost by accident to soak up overflow ticket demand, ended up being the final full-scale concert of Freddie Mercury's life. Part of what makes Knebworth so unusual looking back is the sheer number of small ironies stacked on top of one another. A concert added only because 2 other shows sold out too fast. A performance with no proper professional film record despite being one of the biggest in British history. A quiet, private bassist behaving completely out of character. Offhand jokes about mortality that turned out to be far more accurate than anyone realized. A real, devastating loss of life in the crowd that the performers themselves never learned about until after the lights went down. And a farewell costume, a crown and gown, worn by a man saying goodbye to live performance without knowing, or perhaps half knowing, that it truly was goodbye. None of these details on their own would necessarily register as remarkable. Bands smash equipment. Tours get exhausting. Crowds sometimes turn dangerous. Concert footage sometimes goes unfilmed for mundane, bureaucratic reasons. It's the accumulation, the way all of it converges on a single summer night in Hertfordshire that nobody involved recognized as historic until years later. That gives Knebworth its unusual, almost haunted quality in Queen's story. Freddie Mercury would live for another 5 years after that show, continuing to write and record even as his health declined, delivering some Queen's most emotionally resonant work, including The Show Must Go On, during a period when he was privately battling a terminal illness. But the roar of 120,000 people at Knebworth Park, a crowd size nobody could even fully agree on, was the last time he would ever hear that sound in person, as a performer taking his final bow on the biggest stage of his life. Strange facts have a way of surfacing only once we know how a story ends. In August 1986, nobody at Knebworth was looking for omens. They were looking for a good show, and Queen gave them one of the greatest of their career. It's only in hindsight, knowing what came after, knowing what none of them could have known that night, that the odd details start to feel less like coincidence and more like the universe quietly closing a chapter nobody yet understood was closing. Freddie Mercury walked off that stage as he lived his whole career, fully, theatrically, unforgettably himself. He just didn't know it was for the last time.